In 1979, the young James Hetfield lost his mother because of his family's religious beliefs. Unable to accept it, he vowed never to forgive them for her death, and as a response, he created one of the heaviest trilogies in rock and roll. But what nobody realized is that behind each of these three songs, he had hidden chapters of a journey of trauma, addiction, and a difficult evolution. Today, I'm going to tell you the dark story behind Metallica's The Unforgiven Trilogy. I'm Guilherme, and you're watching Decipher Hits. For James Hetfield, Metallica's lead singer, The Unforgiven 1, 2, and 3 mean far more than just songs. They are painful chapters of his own story. In interviews, he has already said that this trilogy is very personal, because each of the songs tells a different phase of his life. Oppression, then fear, ending in liberation. While The Unforgiven 1 shows a repressed and angry teenager, the second reveals a young man paralyzed by fear and distrust, and the third shows a man facing his own inner demons in an attempt to overcome these traumas. In other words, this trilogy is practically a diary where James Hetfield turned all his suffering into a work of art. But to understand the origin of all this, we first need to look at the singer's childhood. Born into an extremely religious family, James Hetfield grew up following very strict rules. Just to give you an idea, his family forbade him from studying science and other subjects considered worldly. When it was time for those classes, young James had to stand in the hallway outside the classroom if he didn't want to get beaten at home. Though very young, he was already starting to doubt Christian Science, his family's religion. But he kept quiet to avoid getting into more serious trouble. When James turned 13, his father got divorced and abandoned the family, which completely shook James's mental state. The entire structure of an already troubled home worsened when his mother was diagnosed with cancer. And although later on, James even revealed that it was probably a type of tumor that was easily curable. The family again prioritized religion, believing faith would heal her. Until in 1979, when Hetfield turned 16, his mother passed away. After that, he felt betrayed by his family and religion, breaking away from Christian Science for good. Now parentless, Hetfield moved in with his older siblings. And thanks to all these traumas, he became an increasingly closed-off, distrustful, and rebellious guy toward the world. It was only in music that Hetfield found an outlet. At 18 years old, he founded the band Metallica. And in 1991, 12 years after his mother's death, during the recording of the famous The Black Album, James Hetfield poured out all his accumulated anger in the song he called The Unforgiven, and the very title already makes Hetfield's message clear. He would never forgive his family and religion for everything that happened. This sense of rebellion against faith often appears in Metallica songs, including One, which we've already analyzed. Here. In the channel's members area, by the way, if you want to access this and other exclusive Decipher Hits videos, just click the join button. But the reality is that the criticism of this song goes much further. Besides that, as you'll see from now on, the music video starts with this boy playing in a puddle of water while we hear the sound of a trumpet. The boy represents young James arriving in the free world, as any child should be, and the trumpet represents the announcement that this freedom won't last for long. New blood arrives on Earth and is quickly dominated through pain and disgrace, the young boy learns. Basically, we just need to enter this world. We're already subjected to a system of beliefs and rules that tries to shape us through fear and suffering. Then, we see shadows of adults who seem to gather in prayer, while the boy balances on the cracked ground. This symbolizes the moment James learned about his mother's death. And from there, his entire foundation. Everything he always relied on and believed in simply collapsed beneath him. Here the light, which usually symbolizes the truth, hits the boy's eyes, but instead of doing him good, it forces him to close his eyes. The truth was so painful that the boy chose to withdraw and retreat into darkness. And keep this metaphor of light in mind because it connects to the next part of the trilogy. Before everything goes completely dark, he puts an important object in his pocket. Then, Completely alone and still unable to see, the boy starts going down a long and steep stone staircase. Afraid of losing his balance, he avoids standing up, going down, almost sitting step by step. This represents that young Hetfield who, after losing his parents, had to grow up too soon and figure out on his own how the world worked, and how he never had the freedom to think and be himself. The only reference he has for what should be done is what he saw in society. But since society also doesn't tolerate those who think differently, the only way he sees to survive within this system is by giving in and fitting into it. Over time, the child gives in. This scapegoat did something wrong. Deprived of all his thoughts, the young man struggles nonstop. Now, did you notice that in one line he says child, and in the next he says young man? So that's the genius of James Hetfield's songwriting, bringing in the lyrics this feeling of premature maturity, which he was forced to go through. At this moment, we see the young man dragging a heavy chair down a dark path. Climbing onto it, he manages to enter a hole, which here symbolizes an inner refuge. But unfortunately, the young man can't take the chair with him and is forced to leave it behind. This detail is powerful. The chair represents the home, safety, and comfort he once had but lost. So the fact that he leaves the chair behind means that he finally understood he couldn't depend on anyone but himself anymore. Inside that refuge, still unable to see, the young man starts scratching the wall with a sharp object. During the video, it's implied that he spends his whole life making those scratches until he becomes an old man. In the end, he appears carrying a heavy box on his back, wrapped in a large wreath of flowers. He puts that box on the ground, covering the hole he used to enter that refuge. Right after, the old man takes out of his pocket the object he kept when he was a child. It was a key, and with it, he seems to try to open the box, but he can't. Next, we see that the scribbles on the wall were actually the outline of a window that he spent his whole life creating. The window is now open. The light comes into the shelter, illuminating the old man and the box. The old man throws the key out the window, then lies down and dies. These last scenes leave room for various interpretations. But in my opinion, what was inside that box was nothing more than forgiveness. The only thing that could free James Hetfield from all that suffering, but that he still wasn't ready to open. At the time of the Unforgiven one, Hetfield thought he would die regretting his inability to overcome these traumas. Exactly as he sings at the end. Throughout his whole life, he constantly struggled. This fight he couldn't win. The old man prepares to die with regret. That old man is me. Even so, somewhere inside him there was still hope. When he threw the key out the window, it was as if he believed that someday someone could find that key and open that box for him. And that brings us to the second part of this trilogy, released as the second single from the album Reload. The song The Unforgiven 2 was written in 1997, the same year that James Hetfield married his first wife, Francesca Tomasi. And even though he never mentioned who this song is about, not only does the timeline of events, but also several statements from James in interviews make it very clear that The Unforgiven 2 reflects the various difficulties in their relationship. Even though they were together for more than 20 years and had 3 children, their story was marked by distrust, pain, and fear. As we see in the lyrics of the song itself, the song, "Lie Down by My Side, Tell Me What They Did, Say the Words I Want to Hear to Make Them Mine." In other words, he wants her to open up about her traumas, but he does it in an almost selfish way, thinking about his own benefit. And when he says, "Tell me what they did," they here means society, the unforgivable ones from the first song. So, deep down, he was seeking to validate the belief that others were responsible for his inner demons, not himself, thus dodging his own responsibility. In the chorus, he says, "What I felt, what I knew. Turn the pages, turn the stone behind the door. Should I open it for you?" In other words, deep down, he would like to open up completely to her, like a stone book, where she could flip through the pages and see his entire inner self. But he's still insecure because he doesn't know if she's one of them too. An unforgivable one, as he makes clear in the chorus. Are you an unforgivable one too? But all of this changes in the bridge after the iconic guitar solo, when James adopts a new attitude. If at the beginning he said, "Tell me what they did to you," now he says, "Tell me what I did to you." Showing an evolution in his maturity, where he stops blaming the world and starts to see that he also has his own faults and responsibilities. And that's why he says, right after, "Young boy, now I see the sun. Now I see the sun, and remember what I said about what light means." Exactly at that moment, he saw the truth, which was not pretty at all. By the way, James realized that the way he chose to react to his traumas made him become unforgivable as well. Not only that, he realizes that deep down his beloved was just like him. That's why in the last chorus, he stops asking, "Are you unforgiving too?" and says, "You're unforgiving too." Now, he says this not in the sense of, "You're one of them too," but rather in the sense of, you. You are imperfect and traumatized, just like me. It's exactly at this moment that he gives her the key he had thrown away at the end of part 1. Because if he can't open the forgiveness box, maybe she can do it for him and finally set them both free. But what James still hadn't realized is that transferring this responsibility to someone else still wasn't enough. And as his pain grew, music was no longer enough to numb it. That's when James decided to look for another escape valve, much more powerful and much more dangerous: alcohol. Between the late 90s and the early 2000s, James Hetfield went through one of the worst moments of his life. Alcohol not only made him neglectful of his commitments, but also made his behavior much more aggressive and explosive. In 2001, James and Francesca's relationship ended. Tired of the excesses, she confronted him, kicked him out of the house, and forced him to seek treatment. It was at this point that Hetfield interrupted the recording of the band's 8th album, Saint Anger, and decided to check himself into a rehab clinic. James spent months away, leaving the other band members kind of on standby, delaying the recording of the album. And when he came back, although he was sober, he had become much more methodical and explosive. Now, James would only agree to work during very restricted hours to maintain his sobriety, and that ended up causing serious friction with the other band members. The atmosphere inside was so tense and turbulent that the band decided to hire a therapist to accompany the album recordings and conduct group therapy sessions with the members. It was only in 2008, after rehab and years of therapy, that James Hetfield decided to end the trilogy. In the Unforgiven 3, released on the album Death Magnetic, James ties all 3 songs together, but now with a new perspective, much more mature and aware. This song is quite different from the previous ones for several reasons. First of all, it's the only one that doesn't have a music video. Besides that, the song doesn't start with that classic trumpet, but with pianos and an orchestra, creating a more serene and balanced atmosphere. The Unforgiven 3 marks a turning point. If in the first one he blamed the world, and in the second, he tried to shift his responsibility to someone else. Now, finally, he shows the courage to look inside himself and face his own emotional responsibilities. To do this, James uses the metaphor of a sailor who gets lost at sea after being led astray by the light of a golden treasure, referring to the addictions and bad choices that led him off his path. Words I wish were mine. I sailed the sea but was lured off course by the golden treasure's light. Hetfield has already admitted in interviews that he spent his whole life trying to please others and that, because of this, he blamed everyone but himself. But now, James finally realizes that the only one responsible for his own inner demons is himself. That's why he sings in the chorus. And how could I blame you when it's myself I can't forgive? In an interview with The Village Voice in 2012, Hetfield was asked why he didn't stop at the Unforgiven 2, and he answered the following: "Maybe it wasn't finished, maybe I still didn't feel forgiven, or wasn't able to forgive. But I think after the Unforgiven 3, we kind of wrapped that up. I believe that now I can forgive others, forgive myself, forgive and move on. So, in the end, the Unforgiven Trilogy takes us through the 3 stages of trauma, showing how we deal with them. James starts out angry at the world and others, experiences love and the fear of trusting, and ultimately finds self-forgiveness. Anyone who's been to therapy knows this trilogy is more than just a collection of songs. It's an invitation to look inside yourself and let go of all the weight that no longer belongs to you. By facing traumas, addictions, and turbulent relationships, James Hetfield realized that the hardest and most liberating forgiveness is forgiving yourself. For James Hetfield, exposing his feelings and vulnerabilities so openly in his songs was not an easy task at all. He led one of the world's biggest heavy metal bands. In that position, showing a more vulnerable side meant running the risk of being abandoned by the more conservative fans or even being accused of betrayal. But if he was able to open up so much with The Unforgiven, it's because he had already broken that barrier with another song before, the famous Unforgiven. A song that should never have been known by the public, but ended up being revealed and forever changing Metallica's trajectory. To learn more about this story, just click on this video that's appearing up here. If you want me to teach you to make videos like this, just click my free class right here.